Welcome back to the Creative Beam podcast with me, your host, Katie Cowan. Up next is Ian Anderson of the Designers Republic. The iconic graphic design studio was founded in 1986 by Ian and his friend Nick Phillips and became known for its electronic music logos, album artwork and anti-establishment aesthetics. Today, work by TDR is held in the permanent collections of the Museum of Modern Art and the V&A in London, and many graphic designers put Ian as the inspiration for launching their own careers in the field. In 2019, Ian, along with Unit Editions and Spin, published The A to Z of the Designers Republic, a book that explores the studio's output over 3 decades and its influence on a generation of graphic designers. Obviously, I wanted to chat about the book and some of his career highlights, particularly as I grew up with so much of his work: Warp, Wipeout, Populate itself, and Aphex Twin. I could go on, but let's get straight to the interview. Here I am with Ian in Manchester earlier this month. Thanks for agreeing to do this with me. It's an absolute pleasure to see you again and to be able to talk about your career so far.
So far?
Absolutely, because it's not over yet. So where did it all begin for you? I mean, we've got to go back, I think, first before we sort of talk about everything that's been ever since.
Yeah.
But where did you start?
I don't know that I ever really started. I mean, I obviously have done, but there was never a point when I thought, right, I'm going to be a designer, or there was never a point when I thought I'm going to have a design company. So to keep it short, so when I was at school, I was in a punk band, and when I went to university in Sheffield, I was in a post-punk band and did lots of like flyers and posters for the band.
Yeah.
And then I kind of got a bit bored of that, so I started running clubs and promoting bands, and at the same time running a fanzine. So I guess that was the first real design I did, but it was really just photocopies and stuff like that. And then I was approached by some people that left ABC, the band ABC, and formed a band called Person to Person, and they asked me to manage them. And they'd seen the flyers and posters that I'd done, and they said, well, why don't you do the covers, then we keep it all in-house. So I started doing that, and I kind of enjoyed that more than nursemaiding grown men. And then because we'd signed to Epic Records and I knew people, Epic and CBS and various other young A&R people that I'd met through managing the band, people started coming to me and saying, can you do a record cover for this band or a record cover for that band? So I started doing that. And then that was kind of an ad hoc thing. And then I was approached by some people that were in the band, that had been in the band that I was in Sheffield, and they became a band called Chack, out of Fond Studios in Sheffield, which then went on to have hits with like Funky Worm, Crush, etc. in the 80s. And I started doing the artwork for that. And then when Warp started, I started doing the artwork for that. And it kind of snowballed, really. So, I mean, there was never a point when, we had to have a name. And the Designers Republic comes from a lot of the stuff that I used to do when I was managing the band was influenced by sort of Russian constructivism and very graphic kind of stuff. And the keyboard player just said, sort of like the Socialist Republic of, South Yorkshire, which is what it was called in the Tory press at the time. They just said, it's like the Designers Republic of South Yorkshire. So the name Designers Republic kind of stuck. And now I'm here.
That's
33
amazing.
years later.
Brilliant. So something that just started and then organically grew and became this bigger thing.
Well, because I'd never trained to be a designer, so I was influenced by a lot of stuff that wasn't design. And it was quite an eclectic kind of influence or set of eclectic influences. So I think that that's kind of where we had a point of difference, because I'd never trained to be a designer. We learned as we went along. And then we got some notoriety doing covers for bands like Age of Chance, and Pop Lead itself. So a lot of students design students were keen to come and hang out. So we had them in. And I think, like, I always said, like, for the first 3 years, if somebody asked me what I did, I'd just say, well, we do record covers. And then I think really that kind of, that stance of innocence, after 3 years, that's a degree course, isn't it, really? So, I suppose I'm a designer, but, I think like a designer, but it's about ideas and things. And so for me, the design element is only there to better communicate the idea, really. It's not a thing in itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose the very first thing that you were known for, that was kind of the start of all that, wasn't it? And did that kind of snowball to other things? Your work was visually seen and you already had those connections in the music industry. So it was just all kind of a magic, perfect circle, I guess.
I think with Pop Lead itself, we had a common interest in graphic novels, like Watchmen, and that was their first brief to us for DEFCON 1. And so it's always really been, like, for me, it's always really been about what inspires or influences the musicians, why they make the music that they make, rather than trying to represent it. And so it works well when there's common influences or inspirations. And I think that people realise that, and so I guess most of the work that we've done has been with people that understand that there's, sort of a common influence or something, or some kind of synergy,
Is that how it works? You just kind of get together and have a chat about what you both have in mind, or is it a case of them coming to you and saying, we've got this idea and can we run with it?
People don't really come to us with ideas very much, maybe at the beginning. But I think Designers Republic has a reputation now where people come to us for what we do. And it's not to say that we don't discuss ideas, but I think that, there's no point coming to Designers Republic if you want something designed in a way that isn't natural to us. And obviously, what is natural to us, the scope of that is mushroomed massively and brought in. So initially there were very sort of specific, art or culture or pop culture influences. But then there's things like an interest in modern Japanese culture, so that brings in something else. There's an interest in architecture, so that brings in something else. And it's not necessarily architecture or Japanese culture, but those are the things that inform what I do, even if it's abstractly, and a lot of other things, of course. But those are the things that I kind of build on, and there's and also there's the whole Blade Runner thing. So there's a sense of being. I love the idea of technology, but I'm not. I'm a bit of a Luddite sometimes when it comes to the actual use of technology. I mean, I can do it, but it's, I don't. It's only there as a tool. Yeah. To create something. But I love the idea of the near future, so Blade Runner rather than Star Trek. And I think the bottom line as well is most of the things that I'm influenced by revolve around people. So it's how people interact with architecture, or how people might react to something in the near future. It's not really an abstract thing. It's really sort of, it's about target audiences, I guess. Yeah.
You've been recently forced to look back on your career and you've done a kind of A to Z of the Designers Republic.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of rumour in the creative community that you never quite make it past what letter?
M.
Right, okay.
That's in a talk.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely, when you're going through all this wonderful work. So can we start with W?
start with W if you want.
So I think
That's not a bad idea, actually, to start with
a couple of, for me personally as well, things that I'm especially interested in, one being Warp Records.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how did that come about?
Well, Warp was founded by Rob Mitchell and Steve Beckett, and I knew Rob as a friend, just through mutual friends and, going out and things. So I'd been managing a band since 1984 and been running Designers Republic in one form or another since Bastille Day in July 1986, and Warp started in 1989. So it was kind of quite natural that they'd come to me for designing the logo and sleeves, and also I think at the beginning, I mean, it's not that they came. I'm not saying it was all me by any means, but there's also a guy called Rob Gordon who was a producer at Fond Studios, and at that time, as we were sort of friends and we knew each other, I could give some, not necessarily advice, but some pointers about the music industry and my experience in it, so that when it came to looking at their identity and how we communicated what they were doing. So again, there was this a sort of synergy in terms of electronic music and near future and bleep, etc. But it's also, I could put it into context. So it wasn't just saying, right, I've done a logo for you. I understood exactly where they wanted to be and how they needed to be perceived and messaged. So again, it's something which kind of grew organically. There wasn't like a moment when I got a phone call from Warp Records. It was just one evening in the pub, we're talking about football and what music we like. The next week, they've decided to set up a record label, and we're talking about that. And then it just grew from there, really. I mean, the best things kind of grow organically, I think.
Well, business is people, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Always.
And so what was the story behind the Warp logo?
So originally, it's funny that people, the number of times that clients kind of say they want something that's very now, but will have longevity and still look great in 25 years. And I think that, but there's also a sense that with Warp, because of the kind of music that they were looking at putting out and releasing, the kind of artists that they were involved in, even right at the beginning, it had to look, and I mean, I hate saying futuristic now, but at the time it was okay, but now it all seems a bit cliched. But it needed to look kind of futuristic. So what I needed to do was to find a way to communicate something which looked inherently futuristic, but that wouldn't date. So what I did really was I went back to my sort of sci-fi influences, and I looked at a lot of stuff like sort of 50s and 60s sci-fi, like Dan Dare. So the idea really was that when you see it, it immediately looks futuristic and of a type, I guess.
Yeah, familiar.
Familiar. But that it's already dated as much as it's going to. So if you
it's like some of the stuff from Fallout, from the Fallout games.
Yeah,
that kind of.
Yeah, so I mean,
thinking.
It was really that though. It's just that kind of we wanted something that wasn't going to date. So I guess if it's already dated, but still perceived as being kind of the future, Dan Dare, pilot of the future or whatever. So it's not really Dan Dare, but it's that kind of thing. It was something where we wanted it to look as if it had some history.
Yeah, which leads me on to the next W, which is Wipeout, which is what everybody wants to talk about. Because when I chat to people about you and how they got into design, that's one of the things that first inspired them. And again, that's something else that looks to the future. At the time, it was so different to everything else that was out there. Can you tell us more about that?
Well, Wipeout was, I mean, it's quite a simple idea, really. So we didn't want to just create a number of futuristic-looking icons. And if you go right back to the very beginning, Age of Chance, which is 86, there was always a thing where the way that I always work, even still now really, is I kind of try to imagine a world where the particular project can sit comfortably. So whether it's a record sleeve or whether it's work for Coca-Cola or whether it's or Audi or, it doesn't matter what size, what scale, there's always a sense that because nothing exists as an island and everything exists in context. So what you need to do is imagine that if you're doing something that looks of the future, you need to imagine what the world would look like so that piece that you're designing can sit comfortably in that context. So with Wipeout, with Age of Chance, we imagine this in the world of Age of Chance. What can exist in this world and what can't? So we can have lots of ideas and we can mix and match lots of different things as long as they kind of sit together in the narrative that you create. So Wipeout was really that. Wipeout was a series of team icons and billboards and whatever in that world was graphic would be graphic. We designed. So around the racetrack there was like sponsor logos and everything like that. So instead of trying to design some logos, we imagined a world where Wipeout existed, and what would the conditions be, economic, cultural, etc., political, in that future world. And so then when we sat down and started to design the team icons, it's like, well, how would that work? How would communication be, like 100 years in the future? And the other thing that we did, because we wanted to, was we designed each team icon. Well, effectively what we did was we branded each team. So we put as much effort into branding each of those teams as we would, as if Oricom or Quasar had come to us and said, right, we need branding or we need an identity. So we worked on a very sort of detailed level and we imagined the whole thing, and we imagined how those teams might be in competition with each other. And what we wanted to do was to, this was a deliberate consideration, was can we create these brands and identities in such a way that people would sit in a pub and argue about which team was best in the same way they would about football teams. Yeah. So all of those things was like, so it was creating a world, and I think it's an immersive, all-encompassing world that people could, I don't know. I mean that whole thing about escapism, but you can. It kind of predated things like Second Life, but effectively what we were doing with Wipeout was creating a kind of an alternative future reality that you could immerse yourself in when you were playing. So you weren't just seeing who could go around a track in an AG racing vehicle. It wasn't about that. We weren't really so concerned with the game because that's what Psygnosis were doing. Yeah, we were concerned with how you create an alternative world, a future world, or something that you feel totally immersed in when you're there, that you escape 1997, and you're in 2097, and it feels natural. It feels like, like when you're watching, a sci-fi film that works really well, you don't keep thinking, oh, this is in the future. You just position yourself within that world. It was magical. It was magical for me and magical for lots of other people. So with the late 90s, really, the music, the culture at the time, not necessarily what was going on culturally, politically. Yeah. But maybe what happens culturally and politically, sometimes when you knock back against that, I think that, it's the similar thing to this, the old school sort of 19th century struggling artist, or whatever, that draws inspiration and sort of vision from that. Yeah. I think that the late 90s, it was a really interesting time, or because we had to imagine a different world, that we couldn't change the one that we were stuck in. Sure. Yeah, it's an interesting point. And going back to Wipeout, did you have any kind of say in what music was
put into that game?
The original soundtrack was by a really interesting guy called Cold Storage. But there was a point when we didn't push for it, but we kind of suggested that because of the music that we were designing for and we were involved in, and because we were seeing this as a kind of cinematic experience, and that helped inform what we did. I mean, we weren't pushing the game to be that particularly, but the way that we perceived it and the way that we imagined it, that it felt like there should be, a soundtrack. So in the same way that a film has a soundtrack and they release a soundtrack album, we kind of, not for our own benefit, but because we were involved in the whole process, we were talking about the people that we could bring in, and there were some people that we were working with musically or we had connections with musically who really wanted, to be part of it. So, it wasn't, we didn't push for it, but we had connections and experience of that. Whereas, the people who were designing the game, they had an aspiration to have something like that, but they had no connections or anything. So we facilitated that.
Yeah, love that. So I'm going to go back to the A to Z, and we're going to take a leap to the start of the alphabet and talk about Aphex Twin.
Okay.
I obviously love Aphex, as you can hear from my excitement in my voice. Tell us more about that working relationship, because you did quite a few things for them. For him, rather. Yeah,
for Richard. Well, we did some stuff early on, but we didn't have such a direct relationship or connection with Richard in the way that we had, say, with Mark and Jez out of LFO, or Rob and Sean out of Autechre, or even, George, in Nightmares on Wax.
Yeah.
And Richard was always, in a good way, a little bit distant, had his own things. So quite often he'd bring something and then, we'd lay it out, or we'd work on his ideas. But the things that we did, we did Come to Daddy, which was using some images that Chris Cunningham had done. Mm-hmm. But we had quite an input into that because one of the tracks was used for an Orange TV commercial, and we wanted to use an image from the commercial, and they wouldn't let us, which was great, really, in hindsight. So we just described the scene in text on a fluorescent orange cover. So we did that one, and then there was lots of other things, and so sometimes we worked with Richard and sometimes we didn't. But then I think he didn't release an album, I think, for about 11 years before Cyro.
That's the fan favourite, isn't it? So I've read somewhere.
Is it?
Apparently.
Musically or design-wise? Design-wise. Oh, obviously, yeah, I can understand that. So Cyro was a coming together, really, because we'd kind of known each other a little and spoken a little in the past, but we'd never sort of worked closely on something. And I think that in the passing of the 11 years between the previous album and Cyro, a lot had changed at Warp. So unfortunately, Rob had died. Steve had started to take a step back from the label. And there's a lot of new, younger people, which is as it should be. But those people, some of them would have still been at junior school when Richard released his last album. So that there wasn't really, he didn't really feel a connection, but we had a connection because of Rob, and we had a connection because of, his history and Designers Republic history kind of being intertwined, but not really close. And so we talked about what the cover could be. And that was interesting in itself because we didn't talk about what the design would be, but what the cover in itself could be. So we talked about why he hadn't released an album for 11 years and partly because, he didn't have to. And he was involved in other things and keeping busy. And we both our oldest boys were about the same age. So, it's, We had a bit of dad talk. But one of the things that he said, which I thought was kind of key, was that one of the problems that he had with releasing music, I mean, I'm talking on his behalf, he might, say this isn't true. But my perception was that before you release an album, when you're making music, people talk about the music. And as soon as you make an album and release an album, it becomes a product. So people necessarily talk about, do you tour the album, or how do you promote the album, and all these things.
Yeah.
And it's about the physical thing, or even the digital thing, and not about the music and the sounds itself. So he talked about, he liked a lot of the stuff that we did that was kind of quite deconstructive of core ideas. So we talked about, what if the album cover was really just, if an album is about making money and about the ones and zeros of the economics of releasing an album, then what if we did an album cover that just referenced that? So what I did was I spoke to the accountants at Warp, and I just said, can you give us a list of every cost involved in the production of the physicality of this album and the promotion? So we got this really long list, which is what makes up the album cover, really, of the costs. And then what we tried to do was we worked out that based on, I think, either 10 or 15,000 copies being made, that if you divided the costs by that amount and then expressed those costs as a percentage of a pound or a penny, then if you add up that whole list of costs as listed on the cover, which we kind of laid out as if it's, not slavishly as if it's a receipt, but that was the kind of inspiration, that it's a receipt for producing the album, and like a shopping list,
Yeah.
And we tried to do it so that if you add up all the kind of 0.001p or 0.06p or whatever, if you add up all those things, it should come to the value of what you've paid for the album, so you can see where all of your things. So obviously, a huge chunk of that is design, but there were also. I wish, but anyway, but there was the costs, right down to really sort of minuscule things. So there's obviously mastering, but there's also the cost of the bike to take the master tapes to the cutting room, or there's the cost of sandwiches at the press launch, sandwiches and coffee and catering. There's the cost of printing some promo stickers, street stickers in Melbourne and Sydney in Australia, and the cost of getting someone to stick them up around those cities.
These things that you don't think about.
Exactly. So the idea wasn't originally this, but Rich and I, we kind of like the idea that if you looked at that list, you could go and make Syro yourself. And so on the inner sleeve, there's also a list of every single piece of hardware, software, or any other kind of way of creating a sound, like including his mum and dad singing and things. There's a list of all the things that have contributed to making a sound on the album. And then we've done a little sort of schematic, sort of infographic thing where you can see which sounds are used on which tracks. So, it's almost like a deconstructive thing that, if you look at all that, then you should be able to make the album yourself. And if you look at all the costs, you should be able to put the album out yourself. But of course you can't, and that's the X factor that's missing between making the music and it being a product.
I love that. So what's this about Autocra's oversteps, where you've kind of created this perfect, or tried to attempt to create this perfect circle on the cover?
Well,
sticking to the A's.
Sticking to the A's. But Autoca is the thing that I enjoy talking about the most, really, because the relationship there is quite a creative and a discursive kind of process, And I joked a while ago about on social media about like people talk about what you're doing after A to Z, AZTDR. And one of the things that I talked about was that really you should do a whole book of all the emails that go back and forth between Rob, Sean and myself.
That's not a bad idea.
Well, I don't know whether they'd be into it, but it's really an interesting, because what I like to do is to kind of that deconstructive thing of what happens, behind the scenes. So, and it's a way of talking about that, because it's real time, real life conversations, as opposed to going back and, in some biographical sort of, benefit of hindsight kind of history. But anyway, so Oversteps was something where quite often they'd come in and play a few tracks, and they'd always say that. But I'm not really interested in how it sounds in a design context. I'm interested in why they made it and what they were thinking when they made it, and how they wanted it to be perceived, or how they imagined the audience might respond, or what was in their heads when they were making it. And quite often they talk about how they made a particular album. So basically, the way that they work is to create sounds and to create software, how they can edit and affect those sounds and how they can put them together. And so when they came in with Oversteps, they kind of said, it's actually, one of the first things they said was it's actually the most unhuman album that they'd made to that point, just because of the amount of work they'd put into sort of creating the software to create the album, etc.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing was, when I listened, the first two tracks that I listened to, they sounded more organic than some of the things that they'd done on previous albums to me, and the first thing that kind of came into my head when I was listening to it was the fact that, and it doesn't really sound like this, but to me it sounded a little bit like when you go into a church, which I don't very often, but if it's a wedding or unfortunately the older you get, a funeral, but there's always somebody playing like the organ sort of abstractly. And in general, in old churches, the sonics are great because of this, because of just the size and the scale and it all sounds kind of quite dubby, and but anyway, so it kind of interested me, the fact that what they considered to be the least human or the least organic album that they'd made to date, to me sounded like one of the most organic things. And so that was great, because one of the things that I'm really interested in is and this sort of feeds, on one hand, it feeds into sort of the techno element of the design, but it's also about the tension between human and machine. And I've always been fascinated by that. And I've always, and especially kind of with the ubiquity of laptops and digital music making stuff, that how it works. I'm always interested. I was always, I don't know, maybe even frustrated by the fact that a lot of people were so enthralled by technology that they almost became subservient to it, instead of seeing it as something that a human has created that we can use as a tool to create or to communicate the human condition, etc. And it's people talking to people, not machines talking to machines, etc. Then I was thinking a lot about what machines can do that humans can't, and vice versa. So the thing that I always come back to is the fact that one of the most difficult things, from a graphic thing or whatever, is the difficult thing is to draw a perfect circle.
Oh yeah.
For most people, and yet if you're using design software, vector software, then it's the more difficult thing is to create an imperfect circle. Yeah. I mean, I'm not talking about whether it's an ellipse or whatever, but I mean, the sort of the
hand-drawn.
The inconsistencies and of a hand-drawn circle. And so the idea for Oversteps was really based on that. Was like, so the first thing I was thinking about creating perfect circles or imperfect circles, And the main thing, the first thing that I thought was, how many different surfaces will there be for the album? So you've got the vinyl with like inner sleeve, so you've got outer sleeve, inner sleeve, poster, etc. CD, various kinds. You've got each label. You've got ads, posters, whatever. So we worked out, I think, that there'll be about 72 different surfaces potentially.
Right.
So I got the people in the studio to attempt, 72 attempts at making a perfect circle. And so some of them are really big, and they were done with like, kind of big, broad paste brushes or paint brushes. Some are really small. They're almost done with like sort of felt tips, or even like we did a couple of tiny ones with like old school rotring drawing pens. So 72 attempts at drawing a perfect circle, or human attempts at drawing a perfect circle. And so that whenever you see the album, every single surface has a circle, and every single one on every single surface is different. So 72 attempts at drawing a perfect circle all failed.
Yeah, but it's beautiful work. And
no, I love it. I'm not one for favourites. I always kind of say, when people ask me what's your favourite whatever, I always kind of go back to, I think there was a TV show called Ever Decreasing Circles with Richard Bright. Anyway, but I remember one conversation they had where they were talking about what was their favourite jam. And I always think when people talk about, I'm not talking about musical jam and sort of preserves.
What is your favourite jam?
I don't have favourites. That's the thing, is that I don't understand why people have favourites, because to me it's, especially for creative people,
Just putting yourself in one specific box, isn't it, when really you want to be in?
Well, that's it for creative people. What you should aspire to is options, as many options as possible. So, I can say my favourite whatever is something, but I don't really mean it. I only say it just to give an answer, because I like lots of different things for lots of different reasons, and that'll change day by day. And the best thing, I think, is when people say, well, you contradicted yourself. You said you liked green yesterday, and now you like red. I'm going like, great. So I've changed my mind, And I think, so I don't want to talk about favourites.
No.
Particularly, but if I have to say one, then I think that Oversteps is my favourite thing that I've done, because it encapsulates so much in terms of what I wanted to experiment with and say about the sort of tensions between sort of human and machine, or organic and digital, and I think it perfectly represents the music, and aesthetically I really like it. So let's just say that's my favourite, and save you asking me.
No, I wouldn't dream of it, just like I wouldn't dream of asking what your inspirations are. But anyway, I was lucky enough to come along to your talk at Design Manchester and heard a few of your stories. The one I really liked was Moloko's I Am Not a Doctor.
Oh, yeah.
Could you share that story with our listeners?
Well, so Moloko, I know... I still know, but at the time I knew Mark and Rasheen from before Moloko. I knew Mark. He was in the post-punk band that I was in Sheffield. I went on to Fond Studios and Chak and etc. And Rasheen was a good friend, a mutual friend with Rob Mitchell and his wife Michelle. So we all kind of mixed together, and so Moloko is from Clockwork Orange, means milk, in the kind of the language that Anthony Burgess created, and so for the second album for the first album we kind of deliberately avoided it, because it just felt like it was a bit too obvious, and I don't think they liked the name, but I don't think they wanted to be related specifically to A Clockwork Orange. Mm-hmm. But then the second album came, and I kind of kept talking about, the elephant in the room, it's about milk, etc. And so they just said, well, run with it and see what you come up with. So we had various ideas, and we were working with a mutual friend, Elaine Constantine. So we had like a lot of the things we were thinking about for the second album were photographic because we had her, involved. And so basically, I had this idea, I knew the second album was coming up, and one of my big influences, or it's not really necessarily directly, but things that I'm always looking at is anything that isn't music packaging. So any kind of packaging. And in the old days, in the old days of the sort of silver paper and a paper wrap around chocolate, if you got a bar of Milka chocolate and you unwrap the paper thing, it became a square. So the original idea was to do make a record cover that was taking that, pastiching that, and changing Milka to Moloko and, various other sort of bits and pieces, but keeping all the registration marks that are around the edge for the paper wrapper, print registration marks. And so that was the original idea. And then we mentioned it to the record label, and their legal department just said, no, we don't go there. and then I kind of thought, so I was thinking about, I was going to make a stand saying, yes, we are going to do that. And then as I was thinking it through, I just thought, actually, it's really just a one-line gag. It doesn't really say anything about the band. It's just sort of a nice idea. Mm-hmm. And I don't really need to do it now because I've told you it. And it's out there. So, but we had this idea still about sort of the milk of cow and being Swiss chocolate. So the idea originally was to have Rasheen milking a cow in sort of in the Alps or in Switzerland, and then but the original idea was really sort of based on an old TV series I watched as a kid called Heidi, one of those European TV series that we imported before we made enough programs to populate children's TV.
I do remember that.
Yeah,
I'm not too much younger than you.
But the opening sequence of that, as I remember it might not be this at all, but the key thing is, as I remember it, is Heidi skipping down through a springtime alpine field with lots of flowers. Idyllic, wasn't it? Yeah, and there's probably a big dog with a sort of a brandy around its neck. Because I don't remember, but anyway, and in my memory, there's sort of the clanking of like cowbells and all the other kind of alpine staples, And then, so then it was that the record label said, well, that's really interesting, but, it's like, it's not very sexy. And
I'm laughing because I know what's coming.
So, they obviously didn't know Rasheen that well because she was going like, a few expletives and I'm not doing that. And they were kind of saying, well, listen, Alison Goldfrapp will like kind of, be sexy and I can't remember the name out of the woman who's the singer from Morcheeba, but it was always that, but anyway, Moloko didn't want to do that. They were more obscure. They were not really obscure. They were just more left field in the way what they wanted to do. More interesting, I think, really. And so anyway, we were looking around for something that was sort of sexy, but that didn't involve, sort of page 3 or that kind of thing, which I think the record label, they weren't talking about Rasheen stripping off, do you know what I mean? But it was that kind of, then they meant sexy, looking like glamorous and,
Sex sells.
Sex sells and all that.
Yeah.
So anyway, we were looking through some stuff and then we found this... in a book of American advertising, a poster for sort of the Hollywood version of Joan of Arc. And I think it was Ingrid Bergman. Anyway, and I thought, this is kind of, she looks sort of sexy without the sort of sex. There's an attraction, looks glamorous and all these kind of things. Mm-hmm. So we went back and we said, okay, what we're going to do is have Rasheen dressed as Joan of Arc, milking a cow on a Swiss mountain. And I think at that point, the record company were just like, oh, whatever, just do whatever you want. It's just like, just get it over and done with. So we got a guy called, and so then the idea was originally to get like a black and white cow and to paint it purple and white like the milk of cow, so we still had that reference.
Right.
Then, so we arrived. So we got a guy called Kevin, a producer from Switzerland, and he sourced this place. So the other thing was that Mark was really into kind of climbing, and so he sort of said he wanted like the Eiger or the Matterhorn in the background. He wanted something iconic. So Kevin found this place, and a place called Muren, and we turned up. The day before we left, they had the biggest snowfall in that area of Switzerland on record, and it was really late because we timed it to get like the alpine flowers. So anyway, then the record company said, "Oh, we're going to have to cancel it." And I said, "No, it's all right. The idea now is that Roisin will be dressed as Joan of Arc, milking the milk of cow, not on an alpine meadow, but in the snow." And again, and it was just like, "Here's your tickets, just go." So we went up there, and you couldn't get to Muren. You had to go up in the cable car because all the roads were closed because of the snow. So we got there, and we were all like having a drink and that, and we just arrived, and and warming up, and we were talking to Kevin and just saying, "So where's the cow?" And he said, "Oh, it's arriving tomorrow." And we're like, "We're 3,000 meters up. Where's it arriving from?" And he said, "Well, if you look around, there's no black and white cows in this part of Switzerland. They're all brown. So we're bringing one in." So I was going, "How?" And he said, "Well, it's coming up in the service cable car." So, we all kind of like get a bit giddy because, the altitude and, kind of...
Poor cow.
Yeah, exactly. So we kind of went to meet the cow, and it just like kind of came up and when we got there, the cable car was like half full of cow and half full of cow shit. And I mean, I was like really nervous going up in the cable car the previous day, so I know what the cow thought. But anyway, it knew I was the art director. It gave me a look, and it kind of like, Anyway, so we got the cow, and then we got it across, to this little field where we were going to do the whole thing. And we were only about 25, 30 meters away from this like 3,000 meter drop into the valley. So it was all like kind of felt a bit weird. And we decided actually not to bother we decided not to try and paint the cow purple, and we decided to do it in post, and then we just decided not to bother because it didn't really sort of have any relevance anymore. So we had Roisin. Kevin sourced this child's armour from a museum, and we hired that. And so Roisin was sat on this milking stool, just in a suit of armour, trying to milk this cow that wasn't having it.
It wasn't happy.
It wasn't happy. And apparently, because I sort of said the cow doesn't look very happy, and the farmer's just laughing about the English, saying, it's just a cow. And I was saying, yeah, but it still doesn't look very happy. He said, "Oh, well, she calved yesterday." And so like Roisin and Elaine are going, "Oh, he's been separated from its baby the day after it's been born."
Just been through childbirth.
Through childbirth, and now it's the star of Moloko cover. Eventful week. But anyway, so we learnt lots of things on that shoot. I think you should always learn something from everything that you do. And what I learned from that day was that cows can't walk backwards. So every time the cow kind of moved, every time Roisin tried to milk the cow moved forward, and then we had to have a big kind of turning circle to get it back in position with some cajoling. So really it wasn't in a snowy sort of landscape anymore. It was just in mud. So we had to kind of like put all the retouching, put all the snow back in. But I mean, that was it really. But it was just, I mean, I think the moral of that story is that, there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat or to milk a cow. So
brilliant.
Yeah.
I like that. So we could talk about so many more projects from the book, but I think I'll move on because you've been notorious for talking about it for 2 or 3 hours. So anyway, we'll talk about instead why you decided to stay in Sheffield after university there, because you're originally from London, aren't you?
Yeah, Croydon, city of the future. Then my parents moved to Bracknell, Newtown, town of the future in Berkshire. And then as soon as I could, I got out of the southeast and, the whole Stepford Wives kind of commuter belt kind of thing, and came to Sheffield.
What was it about Sheffield that, brought you there?
Two things. One, when I was at school, I was my father and my grandfather before him, man and boy, have been, trade unionists. So I mean, maybe not socialists in that sense, but Labour Party members, trade unionists. And I went, because I was lucky enough to be quite smart. I went to a local grammar school where most of the people weren't working class. They were, it's a middle class school, middle class area. And that just really sort of focused me onto I joined the Labour Party Young Socialists, but the irony is, that places like Bracknell, even if people are out of work, they kind of still voted Tory, because at least they weren't northern monkeys out of work. They were just between jobs, not unemployed, It's just, I just thought it was really suffocating. For me, it was suffocating at the time. And so Sheffield was, this socialist Republic of South Yorkshire, and all that kind of thing in the press. And so on a political level, I kind of thought I'd be going into some kind of socialist paradise. I mean, naively thinking that. But also, and probably more so, was the fact that like all my friends at the time, we listened to John Peel religiously every night, from 10 till 12, Monday to Thursday. And a lot of the music that I really liked, I was never really into rock and roll and rock and all that, and Hair Bears and things like that. But I really liked, even as a younger teenager, I liked Kraftwerk and Neu and Can and Faust and all those sorts of things. Or anything that was a bit arty, so I like, early Roxy Music or things. And anyway, so Sheffield had Cabaret Voltaire, Human League, early Human League, bands like Clock DVA and vice versa. So it was like the the Dusseldorf of Britain. A lot of the industrial electronic music, it was coming out of Sheffield. So that's kind of one of the things. And I just thought, I'll go to Sheffield, I'll join the Young Socialists, and I'll see Cabaret Voltaire and Human League play every week, which didn't really happen. Right. I didn't really change my view, but you're going to university, Labour Party Young Socialist was very much full of middle class people talking about what the working class wanted. And I was like, and I remember going to this first meeting and somebody saying, what the working class want is international brotherhood and sisterhood with workers around the world. And I was like, no, honestly, what they want is what your parents have got.
Yeah. Because
they deserve it. I'm not sure your parents do. But anyway, so I didn't change my views particularly, but I just thought, I didn't want to jump out the frying pan into the fire of the middle class of the southeast for the middle class of University of Sheffield. And the other thing was that I didn't see either Cabaret Voltaire or Human League for about a year, because neither of them played in Sheffield for about a year for various reasons.
You must have been very frustrated that first year.
Yeah, well, I don't know, because we just got on with our own stuff, and there's lots of other really great bands that I would never have heard of unless I'd actually been in Sheffield. So that's why I went to Sheffield originally. And then it gets to the point where Sheffield is a very people place. Lots of towns and cities describe themselves as, big villages, but Sheffield is small enough to be able to say that about the certain different groups. So if you're involved in the music scene, it feels more like a village, because everybody and people interact and so sometimes it's supportive and sometimes it's kind of negative because there's because of proximity and competition or whatever. But it's just a great place to live. And I used to sort of think it's not really necessarily a great place to visit. There's not so many attractions as, you know, as in other big cities, because Sheffield's a big city based on population because of its industrial heritage and, you know, the need for sort of heavy industry and a big workforce, as opposed to, say, Manchester, which, I mean, the mills and et cetera aside, but it has, and Leeds both have commerce, you know, as a thing. So they're not so working class proportionally.
Yeah.
So it's just a really, and you've got the Peak District close by,
and you've got your beloved Sheffield Wednesday.
You've got Sheffield Wednesday and things, but it's also, I think maybe if I hadn't have come from London originally, then I might have been attracted to go back. But I'd made a decision to move north, and, you know, I'd met my then wife and my friends there, and the bands that I knew, the musicians that I knew, my social life and everything. And I didn't really feel that, and because I hadn't sat down and thought, right, what's the best plan if I'm going to set up a design business? Because, as I say, I never set one up. It just happened and grew.
Yeah, just naturally happened. So you never had to have that question with yourself, you know, shouldn't we set this up in London, where...
We just did it, and first of all we did it in my living room, and then we did it in the old Neutron Studios, ABC Studios, because they weren't using it, and I knew those people, which was the boardroom of an old factory that's now Ponds Forge swimming pool. You know, so all those things just kind of happened organically, and to the point where when people said, "Why don't you move to London?" I mean, what moved to London? Yeah, and I just thought, if I was going to leave Sheffield, why would I go to London? Why not go to Barcelona or New York or somewhere? Yeah. It felt, so for me, that, and it just felt almost like I've done London. Although, of course, I hadn't, because I left, you know, when I was, you know, went to university. But I mean, you know, why not move to Manchester? You know, if you're going to move. But one of the great things about Sheffield was that in some ways it forces or encourages you to travel, because there's not so much. So I know a lot of people in London who never really leave London unless they're going snowboarding, or unless they're going, you know, like for work, you know, like in media, like LA or whatever. They don't really know the country. Whereas in Sheffield, you know, you need to, really. And that's a good thing, I think. And I like it. It's a manageable size.
It's not London. Because we all hate where we grew up, don't we?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I did go back. I used to go back to Bracknell to see relatives like once or twice a year. But you know, it felt, it didn't feel right to me, just because, like you say, I'd moved away. But it's also all the dreams of a new town and what it could be. It's kind of failed, really. So it was just like a sort of a series of sort of boxes on estates with like some pedestrian precincts as a town centre. But it's one of those things where it's very difficult to just create a community. And I think maybe it's changed a bit now. I don't know. It's kind of 30 odd years, nearly about 40 years since I left. So maybe there's more of a sense of identity and community, but you know, it's very difficult just to create that just because you've built some houses and a cinema, you know. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. And so looking back, although there's plenty to look forward to, what would you say you've kind of learned the most from your career, and that you sort of ponder quite a lot of? Because I've been speaking to a lot of people who are sort of in a similar level to where you're at now, and there's a lot of looking back, there's a lot of reflecting. And I suppose with the book, you've had to do that. You've been forced to do that. But is there kind of like a running theme that you just keep coming back to?
And I don't know. It's difficult. I mean, the book was a strange thing. I think the things that I come back to that they're kind of wrapped up in memory, really, rather than what I've done per se, but just in memories in general. So there's a piece of work an ongoing piece of work it's a personal thing called Atoms, Vectors, Pixels, Ghosts. And that kind of came about originally two different things. So one was the fact that I don't like talking about, particularly about the process, the creative process. Because I think it's, what I want people to look at is what comes out of the end of the process. So the process is important for me, but everybody, every designer, every creative person, or everybody really should have their own kind of process of how they get through things. And how you do it is based on a lot of different things, you know. Is it nature? Is it nurture? And all that stuff. So, you know, and I definitely don't want to talk about the software that I use. So, and I think that as you get older, or as I get older, and I sort of think back to, like my mum and dad who, sort of died 30 odd years ago. And it's strange that, when I think about that, I think about how all the things that they held dear kind of disappeared. Things that were important to them kind of disappeared when they died. And all the things that my dad and everybody's mums and dads or whatever kind of keep, in their sort of special things box, or they put on their sideboard because it's, important to them, actually kind of weren't important to me. And then when you have to make a decision about what you keep, what you don't keep, then you think, you kind of feel slightly guilty sometimes. But I mean, the sort of the darts trophy that my dad won or whatever, or then it doesn't really mean anything to me. And I could put it in a box and cherish it forever. But actually it's the memory of him winning it, So then it's about memory versus physicality. So Atoms, Vectors, Pixels, Ghosts was originally just a way of me talking about my creative process, or a creative process, without actually having to talk about what software do you use, etc., and all that kind of bollocks. So an Atoms, Vectors, Pixels, Ghosts is the idea that kind of as people, or as entities, everything is, or we are, and everything is made up of atoms, so. Sure. So, and if as designers or creatives or artists, one of the things that we do is represent our experience and our world around, the world around us, then creativity to me kind of starts with atoms and how they're organized and how we reorganize them. And then one of the things that designers particularly have to do, because we need to communicate, we need to have ideas, solve problems, communicate solutions, etc., is we need to make straight lines of those atoms that are fizzing around. So that's vectors, okay, it's a straight line. This is how we make sense of this. We connect this and this and this and make sense of it. But then those vectors and how we've made sense of it need communicating and messaging. So we need to flesh them out into pixels to make something as a richer experience, maybe something that's at one level, one distance more fuzzy, a different distance, clearer. So we're creating this, rich messaging system, anyway, whatever. But then the reality is that kind of once you've done it and it's done its job, it just becomes a ghost. It's the yesterday's news is like fish and chip paper, etc. So this idea that it becomes ghosts. And that was like this idea of for me, for my mum and dad and people that have died, is that, they really only live on in our memory. They become ghosts. They're not really there. Maybe you could say they're more there than they ever were before, more present, but anyway. So Atoms, Vectors, Pixels, Ghosts is this thing. So when I look back, then I kind of, it's strange because looking back at some of the earliest Designers Republic designs, or the earliest things that I'd done, the one thing that kind of struck me was I remember doing them. It's not like a memory loss thing. I remember doing it, and I remember kind of why I did it. But I'm not sure I recognize the person who did it and who made that choice, and maybe I would do it differently now. So it's like looking back onto. It's almost like standing back and looking back at a history is in third person. So if you talk about the things that you remember, I remember doing this as a kid, then you're in that position. Yeah. But if you're looking at something that you created And not just that, but something you created for somebody else to talk to a third party or a target or ambient audience, then it's kind of divorced from you. So there's something of me in there. There's always something of me in whatever I do, as there should be. But, if truth is dependent on perspective, then age changes your perspective, and so your truth changes. And so I look back at some of the designs and I don't think, I wish I'd done something else. But I just see the potential of all the different ways I could have done it, rather than just celebrating the thing that I did. So
maybe that's a brand new project.
Maybe it is. But when you talk about looking back, it was an interesting exercise. And there's also something where I kind of think there's so many people, have copied Designers Republic over the years that maybe and made money out of it. Maybe I should do it. You know what I mean? But I can't quite bring myself to do it because it's when people talk about what's your favourite project, the answer is always going to be the next one, no matter how trite that might sound. It's because there's options and because there's potential for that. Whereas things that are in the past are kind of unavoidably written in stone, which again goes back to the question of options. There's no option. I can't, I could rework, like an Ortega cover on Age of Chance or Crush or Pop Will Eat Itself. I could redo the Warp logo, but that would only be me doing it now. I can't go back and actually change it then. So it is what it is.
Yeah.
And so it's of interest. And it was nice having a little ramble, through my past doing the book. But actually, the book that I'm probably more not proud of, it's not like a value judgment, but the book that interests me more is the companion Kickstarter bonus book, UR-TDR, which I think Unit are going to print up some and sell that.
Great.
But because that's.
Is it important for you to leave a legacy then in that case?
I don't know about leaving a legacy. I think I remember so I studied philosophy at university because when I was signing up for the different subjects, it was one that had the shortest queue and I was in a rush, so I did philosophy, which is a very philosophical reason for doing it, I guess. But actually,
logical.
I loved doing it, and it was closest. I should have done English. Everybody said do English, so I didn't.
Well, that's another one of your loves, isn't it? Writing.
Yeah. So, philosophy was closer than the other sort of thing like sociology and psychology that I thought, Anyway, but I've completely forgotten what I was talking about, really.
We were talking about whether you wanted to leave a legacy.
Oh, that's right, legacy. So anyway, I remember this one of our philosophy lecturers, one of the few lectures that I went to. I didn't have time to do many, but one of them, we were talking about how would you like to be remembered, and we were talking about kind of what we've been talking about, but we were talking in terms of what would you have on your gravestone, and I always sort of felt that kind of whatever I did, I'd like to make a difference, and I think I probably even then meant that in a kind of creative way, although at the time probably I was thinking more about being a writer or something else or a musician of sorts. But so the whole thing is that the legacy of AZTDR, for as much as I'm really proud of it, it also frustrates me because I could do AZTDR Volume 2 and Volume 3 because all of it is important to me and it's all got interesting stories. And UR-TDR could be like, there could be one a year because of the kind of thing that it is, this immediate kind of scrapbooking, sort of ID, sort of zine-ish kind of thing.
Yeah.
But so if I have a legacy to cherish, it's not the physicality of the book or the work. It's when people say, I started designing because of something that you did. Or, not even if people starting to design, that kind of what I did something that changed their life, ideally for the better. So I think that if there's a legacy, then that's more what I'm interested in, that I've done something that's made a difference, maybe for clients, maybe for young or not so young designers now, that you have an impact, that you didn't just sort of pass through life as a spectator.
Well, we'll leave it on that very somber note. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Creative Boom podcast with your host, Katie Cowan. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a review. Go to creativeboom.com/podcast to find out more, or follow us on Twitter @CreativeBoom.